Really, I think it's a real slap at organized labor. I think it really tells you how far unions have fallen in the eyes of many Americans, and many Wisconsinites at least. And Wisconsin is kind of one of the cradles of organized labor, particularly for public employees. So it's really a stinging rebuke of the organized labor movement. And now what's less clear is what does it mean for the upcoming presidential election? You know, President Obama, clearly his sympathies are with the unions, but he stayed far away from this.
He didn't get involved, as you say, but he'll be watching this outcome quite clearly.
Oh, I think this is a real worry for Democrats. Again, I don't think it will be necessarily decisive in Wisconsin, which is a reliably Democratic state, or has been in the last 4 or 5 presidential elections. But it's a state that interestingly votes Republican often for governors, but for the president, at least since 1988, has voted Democratic. But it really is a kind of a scrambling of the deck, and it's a huge victory, obviously, for Scott Walker, who I think now becomes kind of a Republican up-and-comer, a guy whose name you may hear as vice president or presidential candidate 4 years from now.
Generally speaking about the presidential campaign this year, workplace relations, obviously a big issue, people losing their jobs and so on. We just saw the recent jobs data out of the United States, very disappointing. In fact, there's a suggestion that the US is losing momentum in its recovery. How big a factor is that at this stage?
I think that's the decisive factor. I think what voters perceive as the trajectory of the economy will sort of sing the tune for the election for President Obama. Just a couple of months ago, there was kind of impressive job growth, 250,000 jobs a month through the winter. And at that point, even Republicans were quietly saying it's going to be tough to beat President Obama. Romney's not going to have it. And it was even unclear at that point that Romney would be the nominee. But now that you have kind of what looks like could be a stall in the economy and the job market, I think it creates an opening for Romney, and who plays his businessman credential and could be seen as an alternative to the president.
We remember 4 years ago when President Obama came into office that the GFC was just unfolding. There was the bailout of the banks. It was seen as an inherited problem for him. Now, 4 years later, does he have to cop it as his own problem?
And I would ask people I talked to, who do you blame for this mess? And almost no one said Obama. People sort of acknowledged that he inherited the problem, but they also said, well, you know, he hasn't really rallied the system to fix it either. You know, people talk about the bank bailouts, which actually occurred under Bush, but they say that perhaps, you know, okay, the banks got bailed out, but not the homeowners, that sort of thing. There's a kind of sentiment out there of anxiety, of hurt. And again, people don't necessarily point the finger at him for causing that problem, but they certainly say he didn't fix it.
Looking at it in a sort of slightly larger context, we've seen other Western governments have a swing against incumbents. We've had hung parliaments in various countries, or incumbents being thrown out. Is that sentiment true in the United States as well? I
don't think it's quite that strong yet. I think you had more of that feeling 2 years ago when we had the congressional elections in 2010 and the Tea Party was triumphant. I think now it is kind of almost a pox on both their houses kind of feeling, you know. It's tough for incumbents, but I don't think people even know exactly where to direct their anger, and that's part of the conundrum.
What about international issues? We know that President Obama is very, very popular on the international stage. He rates very, very well. But when we look at situations like Egypt and Syria and Iran, which play big internationally, how big will that be in this campaign?
I don't think very big at all. He's been very quiet on Syria. He's talked about international issues mainly to talk about economic issues, worried about what's happening in Europe, what the effect will be on the U.S. economy. You know, American voters tend to be very inward looking. Even winding down the wars doesn't seem to be a big electoral issue. It's the economy number one, the economy number two, and the economy number three. And when most Americans say the economy, they really mean jobs, jobs, jobs.
Is that ultimately what will decide this election?
Well, I think so. The way it looks now, even though you never know what will intrude, but if I had to say now, yes, it's jobs. And I know unemployment will be high on election day, but I think it's how people perceive the direction of the job market. We know unemployment will be high, but are things tracking in the correct direction? I think that would be the kind of judgment people make.